Welcome to the Flyers Nitty Gritty podcast, getting gritty with it, with your host, Yariv Wallach, and sadly, Jamie Bascal could not make this episode. A little last-minute cancellation, but at least, we have a replacement today. We have a good one. We got a good guest today from the High and Wide Radio, Jim. I already forgot how to say your last name.
It's okay, man.
Say it to me again one more time.
Iacovone.
Iacovone, thank you so much, buddy. Jim Iavacone from High and Wide. Super happy to have you on, Jim. Can you just give us a little bit about yourself and just introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, so my name's Jim. I'm a host of the High and Wide Radio show. You might have heard of some of our other shows, our High and Wide podcast show, and we just started a new one, Anything But Hockey. Been podcasting for about 2 years. We just started contributing over at Puck Pros, fan-sided site. And I've met a ton of cool people doing this stuff, and glad to be here with you, Yariv. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad to have you, especially now without Jamie. Otherwise, I would be sitting here talking to myself the whole time. And I don't know how fun that would be. Though I do that already, but,
That's one of the toughest things to do, man, trying to find stuff to talk to yourself about. If you can fill an hour just talking to yourself, you're pretty good.
I don't know if you know, I do these YouTube player profile series. I push out these things where I talk to myself, and honestly, I have to do them in one take. Yeah. I can't sit there and really look at notes, and I have to get it out. Otherwise, I start getting embarrassed, and
it sounds more authentic that way too, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, it's all about authenticity, right? Because if you're kind of into the team, if you agree with somebody, it doesn't matter if you agree or not. It's really the authenticity that you're looking for. Like does that person actually care and love this team and think about them all the time?
100%.
Be able to talk about stuff. Yeah.
I think the people, they want to listen to somebody who's like that, somebody passionate and authentic, genuine, good genuine takes. Especially Philly fans, I think they can tell if you're being fake or not. Absolutely.
And I think it comes because we're always listening. You know what I mean? Even if I know so many people who aren't Flyers fans, but if I ask them something, they're like, oh yeah, I'll see people wearing a Carter Hart hat out of nowhere. We're always paying attention to sports, and we hear same patterns. Oh yeah, I heard that they're going to be good, right? So we do always pay attention. Even the ones that don't care about hockey, it's they're waiting for a reason to care. You know, and I feel like Philly definitely has that. You call bandwagon, call whatever you want. Everybody will be behind winners. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's that we love sports and we're looking for authentic winners. And when we listen to people who are just kind of not authentic about it or don't really own things, I think Philly's pretty harsh on that stuff. And I think you guys are it's the Angry Negative podcast, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't get more Philly than that. I mean, right? That name alone.
Yeah, that came about. Oh my God, I think a little bit over a year ago now with Dan the Flyer fan. Yeah, that's a fun show. It's less angry and negative this year, thank God, because the Flyers were actually really good. So last year things got really interesting and depressing, but this year everything was like rainbows and butterflies.
I had to end on a sad note too, right? It couldn't be that sweet. It wouldn't be Philly if everything was okay. I totally hear that. So let's talk about that actually. Some news, everybody keeps it's almost like this thing that keeps getting pushed down the road, right? This bucket of, the announcement of almost the inevitable return, because no matter what, we're going back to some kind of lifestyle. So there's going to be a return, whether to this season, next season, but I think we've gotten to the point where this season is coming back. This playoffs are coming back. We're down to a 24-team playoff. That might not be great for everybody. But that's where we are today, and I think it's an interesting place to be. I know we're trying to narrow down where the games are going to be. I think they might be down to 2, maybe 4 cities. And overall, I think we're getting to a place where it's going to be maybe the most unique playoff in the modern NHL history. You can scoff at that can upset you, or you can see it as an opportunity to make history, which I think, and this was my view, and I'll open up to you in a minute, Jim. This was my view initially, is that I was of down on all of it. I'm kind of, I like the 82 game season. I want the records. I want everything to be nice and clean, and I want things to work out. But I don't, after thinking about it for a while, I don't really think life is like that. And I think we have an opportunity to play hockey, opportunity to make money. This league has lost a lot of money. A lot of people lost kind of interest. We have an opportunity to create a bunch of interest. It's just limitations create opportunities, and that's kind of how I see this. As if they can play hockey and do it successfully, I'd love to see it. Even if it does mean interrupting next season and pushing it down down the road a little bit. What do you think, Jim? What do you think about that as well?
I love it. I mean, I've talked to guys who say things like, "Oh yeah, but whoever wins the cup, it's going to be with an asterisk." And okay, well, it's going to be with an asterisk for whoever wins it, whatever city wins the cup. So I'm kind of like, well, wouldn't you want that to be your city? Like, if there's a team that's going to have to win the cup, why wouldn't you want it to be your city still? So. I'm thrilled that they're going to play. I don't care that it's going to be 24 teams. I think that's maybe even better. And I'm thinking back to like the 2010 Flyers a little bit. Like if you're one of those fringe teams, and I'm thinking about like the Metro division a little bit, where you had the Rangers, Blue Jackets, Islanders, Hurricanes, all battling out for the last couple spots, man. And that's one of the things I was disappointed in the most, because I wanted to see how that was going to finish, dude. That was going to be a fun finish. So, to let all of those teams in now and let them kind of beat the hell out of each other for a couple games, yeah, I'm all about that. I mean, I think I saw something like Montreal was going to end up playing somebody. There's a couple scenarios where they're going to be playing, some weird teams. I think one of the scenarios had them playing Pittsburgh or something, and I'm like, well, you'd expect Pittsburgh to win, but what if Montreal comes in and beats Pittsburgh? Like, that's exciting. Like, people like to see upsets. Sucks for all the Pittsburgh's fans, but if you don't, just win then. If you don't want to be upset, just win. So, I think a lot of people root for underdogs. With 24 teams, there's going to be a lot of underdogs, and it could be fun.
Yeah. And to your point, actually, specifically with Montreal, I'll represent Jamie here, because we were talking about this, and he specifically is worried about somebody like Carey Price, right? Carey Price is a monster goalie, right? He is worried that a guy like that could steal a series. Now, in that scenario, I think we would be very happy. But in particular, I think that's where it makes people uncomfortable, is that teams that maybe don't deserve a chance at the cup are getting it. And that's where, my con is. But ultimately, I am such a pragmatist in the sense where I'm like, it just makes things more interesting as well. Think about how many teams now care about the playoffs over before, where, don't get me wrong, you had a good amount of teams, but now all of a sudden you open that up, you create all these, you play a lot more meaningful hockey, right? So as before, you had the total games with the 16 teams structure. They have a 24-team structure. It won't be 7 games probably, right? It'll probably be 5 games and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But those are a lot more games to televise, to make money off of. I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense in the virtual scenario, this weird scenario we're in, where it's kind of, you get a little bit of a season in there too. Now, do I worry as a Flyers fan that maybe the Flyers get caught flat-footed? Yes, but having said that, if you're good enough to win a championship, you should be able to win regardless, right? And I think you might agree with that statement, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100% agree. What's fun for me is because, first and foremost, I'm a Flyers fan, right? But I am 100% a hockey fan. Like, when the playoffs are on, I try to watch every single game. They have the 7 o'clock games, the 10 o'clock games, whatever they are. Then you have, the Saturday, Sunday games where on at 2, 5 and 7. I watch every single one. So now that if there's going to be 24 teams, I'm excited for that. I'm just excited to watch hockey. You know what I mean? So, yes. I guess there are some cons. A team like the Canadians could, win a round, potentially win the Stanley Cup somehow. But it's dude, I'll watch it. I'm gonna watch regardless. And if they do that, hats off to them, man. As a Flyers fan, it would suck, obviously, but things happen, and I would just be happy to watch hockey.
Yeah, and I guess let's think of it for a second there. One, I love everything you said there, because it's just more hockey, and we don't even really realize how much more hockey that really could be, and how much hockey will be on television, which would be really cool, and how much will be part of the national conversation, which might be awesome as well. Like a little more. There's actually some positives here for the Flyers. Like, I don't want to talk about Nolan Patrick in particular because that one's up in the air, and obviously Lindblom, I don't even. Nobody should even be thinking about him for a playoffs, let alone next season at this point. You wait for him to make that call. Mm-hmm. But, outside of that, the Flyers did have some injuries. There were some things going on throughout the lineup, right? Obviously, you could say the same for a lot of other teams. Carolina Hurricanes are a team I can think of that had a lot of injuries, especially on the back end, right? There are benefits to kind of healing, regrouping, and in my particular opinion, the Flyers were on the brink of a successful decade, potentially, maybe 5-10 years, hopefully with AV at the helm. So maybe more of a system and a structure and a repetitive progress that maybe this break could even benefit us, where somebody like Provorov is just in the gym every day, just becoming a machine and a robot, and will come out on the other end stronger and faster somehow. It's like this could actually benefit the Flyers. Do you think it might be onto something there?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because, to your point, usually when we get to the playoffs, teams are beat the hell up, right? Like, they're all, and especially after the first round, like, teams are just, skating on, you hear all the time, guys are skating on one leg. This guy's got something wrong with his ribs. This guy's got upper body injury. Everyone's going to be healed up. So what I'm expecting is maybe like the first couple games, 3-4 games, to be, like the beginning of the regular season, like a little bit sloppy, teams kind of figuring things out again. And then maybe they start to turn it on in the second, third round. I expect to watch, full-on playoff hockey. Because I think after a couple games, they'll be back in the groove. It's going to be interesting to see what the intensity's like, for playoff hockey with no fans type thing. That's what I'm interested to see. I don't know if you've been watching any of the soccer that's been on lately, Yariv, in the Bundesliga.
Been watching UFC. Been watching the UFC. Did not get to watch the soccer quite yet, but please continue.
No, I mean, I think it's like the same thing. I mean, it's kind of like eerie a little bit. I haven't noticed a difference in intensity except for there's like less theatrics, where they're playing the game the same way and just as hard, but you can tell that they know that there's no crowd. You know what I mean? Yes. So for hockey, the way that they play and as hard as they play, I do wonder if that will have an impact or not without a crowd.
Well, that's actually a great point, right? And I would actually assume that it definitely would, and in my opinion, with hockey for sure, because I think there is a theatrics with hockey. I think the fighting and the hitting and the crowd erupting, but it might actually hurt as much as it benefits. So it might be a complete like break even because while you actually have the distraction, right? And then you have that impact less on younger guys. So what is the playoffs now? Right? Now, the national coverage is still there. There'll still be some people and the fans and all that, but, I mean, it's going to be a whole different mindset. It's going to be like fighting at practice, It is going to be weird and different, but it could materialize into something still as intense as far as, like, on the ice itself, right? It's the theatrics around it, those humongous... I was actually thinking specifically to the moment where Mike Richards scored that goal against Carey Price, the infamous goal where he kind of slides underneath them. There's that big collision.
Right.
And then because it's not a beautiful goal. It's a really ugly goal. And then he just taps it in and the crowd freaks out. And everybody knows in that moment the Flyers are winning that game. It was the first goal of the game. Without a doubt. He did that and we're like, yeah, we won. And I remember thinking there, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's over. Richards took over. I remember thinking that, like, is that element still gonna be? I feel like yes. But it won't be the same. Does that make sense? Like it'll be like weird. It'll be like we'll feel it, but we're like, what just happened? It'll be like you know what I mean? Almost like when Kane scored that goal and nobody knew went in when the Flyers lost, and everybody's like, wait, what? I feel like a lot of goals might be that,
Yeah, for sure. No, I got goosebumps thinking about that play. That's one of my all-time favorite plays. You know what's going to be fun or interesting, like, as fans, I think we're going to find new ways to watch the game. Like, a lot we're on Skype right now, but a lot of people do like the Zoom calls these days and whatnot, like the group group calls. Like, I wonder if, like, you can do that while we watch a game or something, or, like, I think people are kind of starting to hang out a little bit in small groups or whatnot. Like, I think now more than ever, people are going to get together and watch the Flyers on TV, because you can't go to games. People are going to find a way to watch these games and get excited for sure. If the players, they're playing for the Stanley Cup still, so I'm assuming the intensity is going to be there. It might have to build up a little bit, like somebody might have to get knocked around a little bit for them to be like, hey, like, this is real, like, we're actually playing. You know what I mean? So it is going to be interesting to see how they react. Your point with the Richards thing, I'm picturing him like screaming and all that, and yelling and being so excited that he just scored, and I'm seeing the crowd all jump up at the same time, and it's like, would he react the same way if the crowd wasn't there? And I'm like, I guess, right? It's a huge goal. I would react the same way, I think. Yeah. If I scored that.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because, if you think about it, you play like street hockey, nobody's watching you. You get super excited to score a goal, I don't know. It's something to consider. I think we'll see. And the interesting part is, as the summer rolls on, like, and again, I'm not predicting anything, so obviously this could definitely be wrong and a moot point. But if things loosen up as things move on, and maybe they start doing some capacity, 10%, and maybe those tickets are really expensive, and you're talking about a Stanley Cup where like 1,000 people are in the stands and each ticket's like a few $1,000s. Obviously, I'm completely making that scenario up, but you do kind of wonder about that. Where like, would people pay all this money to get into a Stanley Cup final, especially when nobody else can go? It'll get kind of weird. It's like moments of history.
Yeah, if the Flyers go to the Stanley Cup and they let like a limited amount of fans in, and I have an opportunity to buy a ticket, I think I might buy a ticket. I've been asking guys, Kyle and Jack on High and Wide, if the Flyers won the Stanley Cup, can I expect to see you on Broad Street? Right, and
I said that on the podcast.
I'll be there. Like, I'll be on Broad Street.
I'll be there.
Right, like,
I will be there without a doubt.
If the Flyers win the Cup, I can die happy. So if I'm out partying on Broad Street and God forbid something happens, it's like, hey, well, I got everything I needed.
Well, I was here, so it's funny you bring this up. So we talked about this on the podcast. I actually brought it up. I've been here for two separate championships, for the Phillies and the Eagles. I saw the chaos that broke out in this city when there was a championship. I'm not saying we're the only ones, right? There are other cities. Now, if any team wins, like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why would they not riot in the streets? If Philly wins, we are definitely rioting in the streets.
100%.
But about 50% of us wearing masks. Probably not.
One of the longest streaks in NHL history right now, and like, we're dying for a cup, and I don't care if there's an asterisk, like, we still beat everyone to get it, I'll be there. I'll be on Broad Street 100%. It'll be, let's say they start up end of June or July, like the cup will be in August. Like, I would assume that in a couple more months things will be even more calmed down, so we'll be in phase whatever by then. I'll absolutely be out there. I'll be if they won the cup now, I'd be out there.
I 100% agree with you. Like I said, it's like the moment you're not really thinking rational. That's not really the point there. And that's kind of what I'm saying, right? It's like, even let's not think about us. Let's even consider ourselves rational people. But in that moment, of elation, and you're waiting, like you say, you can die happy. Since I started following this team, I think it's winning a Stanley Cup. I don't know how I would react. I'm honestly not sure.
No,
I think I'll have a problem. I'd probably pace around for a while. I'd be confused.
I'll be blackout happy. Like, part of me is like, oh man, what's gonna happen? If the Flyers win, it's just gonna be elation, just pure happiness, bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, big pro to the playoffs there. That possibility.
Yeah. 24 teams. From what I read, and maybe if you've heard anything different, let me know. I've heard the top 4 teams in each conference are going to get a first-round bye. So it's going to be like, Boston, Tampa Bay, Washington, and the Flyers all with the first-round bye. And then I can't think of it. Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't remember who.
We have a bye.
Yeah, and I'm like, the first time ever, like, you wouldn't want to buy, like, because I kind of want the Flyers to play a couple games first, because I feel like it's disadvantage if, and I'm just going to use Pittsburgh and Montreal. I'm sorry, did I freeze a little bit?
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
Yeah, I'll use Pittsburgh and Montreal as the example again. Let's say they play a couple games and, Pittsburgh wins in a best of 5 or whatever. They've had 4 or 5 games to get their legs under them, and now they're playing the cold Flyers who haven't played in 3 months, whatever, by then. It's like, this is not really fair,
Yeah. Well, that's the weird, that's actually a good point, right? I imagine they have to have something to supplement that. The teams that have a bye, maybe they get friendly or exhibition matches prior to that. You know what I mean? Because that's actually, you're right. I mean, that is kind of an advantage. But then again, make it that round as well, right? They're also, it's, but you're not wrong. I mean, it's an advantage. We've seen it. I mean, we've seen what happens when you're not warmed up. Everybody's seen it.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes, like, I know for sure Jamie makes him nervous about stuff like that, about not being ready. I personally think that there are ways to get creative, and I think everybody's got to deal with a very similar thing. And I think that as far as physical fitness, I mean, I pay attention to my physical fitness. I don't know if that's something you do. Yeah. But there are all kinds of ways, exactly, to kind of push your body, prepare yourself. And I think the coaching staff and the training staff can get creative in all kinds of ways of trying to, prepare themselves for this kind of sudden shift. And, like we were saying earlier, I think there's going to be a benefit from it too. A little bit of that slow in the beginning, but they can find a way to have those exhibition games or something, set something up, maybe even play each other internally if they have to. But whatever it is, just get it going. Play the Phantoms. They're not doing much.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good idea with the friendlies, whatever, like they do for soccer. Dude, I'm just happy that it sounds like there's definitely going to be hockey from the way that it sounds. Over the weekend, it sounds like they made a lot of progress. I thought there was going to be like a definite word at some point today, but nothing ever ended up coming out. So we'll see.
I think the reality of that is more of a schedule thing. Okay. Is that they don't know. I mean, that's my guess. I really don't know, but my guess is that they just don't have an exact date. And the plan is like, okay, yeah, we can do this. But it's like, oh, do we do it on the 12th, on the 10th, on the 19th? And they don't want to give us a date and then change it like a couple days later. So I feel like that's what's happening, but it's confusing, Like I thought today too was going to be like on this date, and then, they're kind of just piecemealing all the info.
Yeah, it does suck for them because you're right. If they say something now, if they have to change the date, everyone's going to get pissed off, and they want to be sure and whatnot. So it makes sense.
And then they'll doubt it, and then they'll doubt the plan and the whole thing. Everybody's too sensitive. That's the reality. So, you know what I mean? But I agree. It was a little weird. But let's go on to a couple other guys. And we talked about this a little bit prior to the call. We have three players that the Flyers have not signed, 3 defensemen who are kind of age to play pros. That's Kalynuk, Bernhardt, and Hogberg. Hogberg and Bernhardt really are at a point where they're essentially free agents at this point, I believe, or it's in June. I totally forget the deadline. That would have to be Jamie's call on that one. And Kalynuk, I know he was supposed to make an announcement of whether he was going to college, whether he was going to sign potentially pros. I personally think he's going back to college and really just wants to know if they're not hockey and he hasn't announced anything. Because that would be my concern if I was Kalynuk, is if I was going back to college and they weren't playing hockey at college, I would go over to Europe or men's league or sign in the NHL, anywhere I thought I could actually play pros. But so we have those 3 guys. Do you think that what's happening in the current scenario? We kind of ask everybody who comes on the podcast. Those 3 guys available. Do you think this pandemic of where we are now, how things have transpired, maybe as things become a little more even lenient now, do you expect any changes with those? Do you expect the Flyers to potentially bring on a couple more Swedish kids, or do you think somebody like Kalynuk might make a decision to go pro now that the pandemic is here?
So let me start out with the guy I know the least about, in David Bernhardt. I haven't heard much about him, so I'm not sure what he's doing. I know the Flyers are pretty stocked up in as far as the prospect pipeline. So it's like, if he doesn't come over, if they don't give him a contract, I 100% get it. I think he was a later round pick. Hasn't really done much over in Sweden. I think he may have even gotten demoted to a lesser league this year. As far as Hogberg, anybody that I've talked to about Hogberg loves him, and they're looking forward to him coming over. However, people are starting to wonder if Fletcher wants him over here, because they haven't signed him yet. And they're saying, specifically Alex Appleyard is thinking it doesn't look like he has a future in the Flyers organization. Who knows? But, I always, if you draft a guy, I like to see him develop in the system somehow. And so to not see him come over and at least play for the Phantoms is a little bit disappointing, because, if you look at the Phantoms roster, they can use all the young help they can get. They had a rough year. As far as Kalynuk, I thought I had heard that he was going to go back to school, or maybe that was because he just hadn't made an announcement yet. He'll be a senior this year. He's had solid seasons for Wisconsin. Was he the captain this year?
I think he was
assistant captain. Okay.
Let me look it up. Actually, that's a good question.
Okay.
I'll look it up here.
So he had a solid year. He turned into a decent puck-moving defenseman. And I remember reading, I think it was earlier today, the coaches really liked what they saw from him. Was it Tony Granato? Was Tony Granato the coach over there? And I can double-check that.
I think it was. No, it's okay. He was captain. You were right. He was captain. You nailed it.
Granato was quoted as saying, he's really come on and taken a step forward this year. And I think he became the main the quarterback on their top power play, which is a big deal because Wisconsin was a pretty loaded team offensively. He was a later round pick by the Flyers, seventh round pick in 2017. If he can at least get to the Phantoms, and I would like to see him with the Phantoms this year. He's 23 years old. I mean, that's not necessarily like young for a prospect anymore. 6'1", 181 pounds. If you ask me, he's, it's time, dude. Like, if he's the one, making the decision, I think it should be okay. Let's go pro next year. Otherwise, I'm not sure if he's going to have a spot in the organization. All I've heard is good things about Kalynuk this year, so it would be a disappointment not to see him, in the pipeline, like legit in the pipeline.
I think that's really fair, actually. And one, bringing up that he's a captain, it's a really good point. We actually have not mentioned that on this podcast, being, at least not that I recall, because being a captain is, if you think about it, we've mentioned it in the fact that we know he's a leader of that team, and we know that he wants to go back and lead the team, and that they're losing talent. And that he feels that he owes something to that university, and maybe he feels that if he doesn't have a future in hockey, at least he has a degree, right? He's got a 4-year degree. Maybe that's what he's thinking. He's on his senior year. But you're not wrong, right? He's 23 years old. You're just of age now to be considered like a real NHL caliber prospect, because most defensemen don't really touch the NHL until they're about 22, 23 years old, right? We saw with Friedman, like they really just get like a taste. And that's kind of where he is, that if he's ready next year, right? And that's kind of what we're looking at, is like that's your kind of window now to get on the Phantoms, get on the power play. They have holes, like you said. Get on there, get on that power play, start producing, and maybe you're going to steal Friedman's spot. Because I'll be honest with you, man, I saw him at camp, and I really liked what I've seen from him at Dev Camp. Just in person and compared to the others, just his polish, his skating, his stick handling, the whole combination of tools, just really, really high end, especially for a guy taken in the 7th round.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we saw guys like Wyatt Wiley and Igor Zamula already going to be with the Phantoms next year. They have a guy like Mason Millman in the pipeline still. As far as Phantoms, I mean, there's a couple guys on the Phantoms. I'm not sure of their contracts or not, but we're looking at guys like Tyler Wotherspoon, Andy Walensky, I believe, had a cup of coffee in the NHL with the Ducks, I want to say off the top of my head.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, so I mean, the Flyers, they have some defensemen in the pipeline. A couple guys, that could potentially come up within the next year or so. I think he might be missing out on an opportunity, if he doesn't go pro. But like you mentioned, there are definitely pros to finishing out, college, getting a degree and whatnot. And then, the only thing that weirds me out a little bit, he's going to be 24 years old in his, first professional season, and that's pretty old.
Well, there's some success of that, though. I do agree, but I mean, Matt Reed did it, right? There's an example of a guy who came in, and Matt Reed, and I made the mistake of thinking that he was still developing, he was just ready. He was seasoned by the time. So that is what he was, right? At 24, he was fully developed. He came in, his production never really fluctuated. It just was the same, right? He was like a 20-goal scorer, 45-point guy, could play a good two-way game the entire time. I expect like Kalynuk, that would be like his experience. He would come into the NHL like most likely developed, like a Danny DeKeyser, or a lot of these guys who probably are not going to get that much better. Now, they could get that much better and grow to be elite dudes, but they're probably going to be just good NHL players and not like elite. And even like Kevin Hayes, who is a great player, don't get me wrong, he was a monster at the end of college hockey, at least statistically. And while he's really good at the NHL level, he's not, a 90-point player. I think there's a reality to that too, is that the two-way game, a lot of these guys are kind of two-way, or they do really well in college, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to game by just beers, which is valuable, but it doesn't mean you're going to be, the end-all, be-all. So sometimes they just develop and they're just ready to go the way they are.
No, you know what? That's an awesome point by you, Yariv, because I think a lot of times we think about, when you hear the word prospect, right? You're thinking, at least for me, I'm thinking of a guy that's developing. He's going to develop. And then, when I see the age, 23, 24, I'm like, well, how much more is he going to develop? Like, you're pretty much a full-grown man by the time you hit 23, 24. And whatever you're good at is what you're going to be good at. You're not going to get, leaps and bounds better, when you're that old. Like, you basically are what you are. Having said that, when you look at the Flyers defense, we're looking at Provorov, Sanheim, Myers, Niskanen at least for one more season. I left somebody off there. Who did I leave off? Provorov, Sanheim, Myers. I left off a big gun, I felt.
Ron.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, let's say the top four. The top four is loaded. Like, it's going to be really tough for any of these guys. Yeah, York. So, Kalynuk, if he ever makes the Flyers, he'll be at best a fifth defenseman, at the very, very best, right? And at worst, he'll be, a seventh. He'll be a, sixth, seventh defender, which is fine because teams need that. Sure. So that's a really good point by you. If he comes in and he is what he is, that's fine because every team needs a sixth, seventh defenseman.
Right. And like, there is always the chance that a player develops beyond that. Like, majority of players will come in and they are what they are, but there are those chances that the guy goes on to be more. Like Mike Knuble is like a weird one, right? Where you just didn't even understand why he kept getting better as he got older. It was just confusing. I don't understand. He didn't even do anything fancy. Like, you didn't watch him play and go, wow, Mike Knuble is killing it tonight. You're just like, I don't get it. He had a goal and 2 assists. Like, what happened? And he was just a guy I think a lot of it maybe is mental. And some of these guys have a lot of talent. And then when, like, the maturity level catches up, and maybe Kalynuk is one of those guys where he obviously has a really high skill level, that maybe when the maturity and the pace and the decision-making catches up, it kind of aligns into, like, turning into a star, where some players, maybe they don't mature, or maybe they do mature, but their skill level was never that great. I think, like, Mike Richards was, like, kind of like that, where he looked like a men's player. Like, you watched him play, he didn't look like the best player in the league or even on the team, but when he was on the ice, he just had the drive, the work. There's like all these little factors about a player that can cause them to hit another level.
Yeah, it's true.
Sometimes they develop ways. Yeah. But so I wanted to talk about another player, and I wanted to talk about him because he was kind of going around the news today. And personally, he is my favorite player because when I started listening, when I started getting into the Flyers, he was a rookie. I was a kid. I couldn't even say his name right at the time, but it was my first Flyers hockey card was Simon Gagne. And I saw interviews going around with him today, and I truly love him as a player, and I think his game actually would be even more appreciated today in a less physical NHL. But just Simon Gagne, I thought was a truly special player. Not the most dynamic as far as cutting in through players left and right. He was definitely more of a pure shooter type of guy. Like, he definitely had some moves. He was shifty in his own way. He was faster on that sprint, that straight shot. And the leech, he was a very good playmaker, and he was a very responsible player. Also very good defensively, rarely made mistakes, usually kept his plays simple unless he was in the offensive zone, and had a sneaky way of being not just defensively sound, but defensively aggressive. And for a player that really was not aggressive, and I can say that confidently, Gagne was not aggressive. But I have really fond moments of him. Jim, do you have any moments of Gagne? How do you feel about Gagne as a player? Ultimately, I feel like he's exactly what the Flyers kind of missed today, is that goal scorer, shoot first type of guy.
Yeah, 100%. So I remember Gagne as one of my favorite players growing up as well. Specifically, him and Forsberg was one of the most fun tandems that, we've gotten to watch as Flyer fans. I mean, it was like they were meant for each other, right? 47 goals, 41 goals, back-to-back seasons for Gagne. I think when you use the word responsible, that is probably the best way to describe Simon Gagne. Because, yeah, he scored 47, 41 goals. And, when you think of goal scorers, the first guy that comes to your mind is Alex Ovechkin, right? And then what's the next thing that comes to your mind? Yeah, he doesn't really play that much defense, right?
Yeah.
So, when you think of Simon Gagne, I always thought of, responsible. He did what he had to do. He was very good defensively. And then, he scored 40 goals twice. And he probably could have done it again, but he got, I think, 2007, injuries. 2008, he got hurt, right? Yeah. 34 goals, 40 assists in 08-09, nothing to sneeze at. And unfortunately, looked like he started to battle some injuries again. Yes, Gagne was one of the most, I don't even know if it was fun. It was just it was cool to watch. He played so cool. He was always so calm. It never looked like he was working that hard, but you knew he was. I'm not trying to call him lazy by any means. He was just one of those guys that could just play gracefully, I guess,
Yes. No, that's actually really well said. He definitely had a grace to his game, right? He wasn't the most physical player, but it's not like he lost a bunch of puck battles. In fact, he played the penalty kill. What kind of player like Simon Gagne today would play the penalty kill? That's he really was not an aggressive player. It wasn't like he would go into the corner and throw his shoulder on a regular basis. He was more of a stick check guy. But he would block shot. He would do all the great. I think that was a good word for it. It's a gracefulness to his game. His shot was the only thing about him that was mean, I would say. That was the only thing that was really aggressive. His shot was very aggressive. As soon as he has an opportunity to shoot, boom, he would shoot. From anywhere. Didn't matter. And I miss that personally. And I don't think the Flyers have enough of that personality. That person is willing to do this. It might have because even Gagne wasn't a 40 goal scorer in the beginning, right? He turned into one. That I'm hoping to maybe Konechny or somebody else. Actually, I'm gonna do this video. I do the player profile series, so my next three are Haig, Giroux, and Farabee. And I've kind of been saying this for a while, is that I don't think they're the same type of player, but I do see Farabee as bringing a very similar skill set to what Gagne brought. Again, that kind of graceful, two-way goal scorer type of guy, shifty. I would say Farabee's a little more rugged. He's definitely plays more of an American style. He's a little more Mike Richards than he is pure Gagne, but he does have a really sneaky shot. He's slight, he's thin, he came in young at a young age. He's two-way responsible, plays the left side. Also is pretty fast. He's not the same Gagne burn speed, but he definitely is a higher the Farabee and Gagne comparison.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. You know, when you said that and then thinking about it, it's like, yeah, I could see Farabee sort of being like Gagne, but you know, Farabee's got that little bit of snarl, like like Gagne would have never went after and
right.
I'm not saying Farabee did it maliciously, but I can't see Gagne making that type of play. You know what I mean? I could see somebody making that play on Gagne for sure.
Right.
So Farabee has that little extra snarl in his game. Maybe he's like a mix between Konechny and Gagne. Who knows? But hey, man, if he could turn out to be a 35-plus goal scorer, Joel Farabee, wow, dude. And then
that's how I see him. That's how I see Farabee. I mean, I kind of had this dream in my head, and I know we're going to talk about this later, of like Patrick, Lindblom, and Konechny, right? We even together. But then you see a guy like Farabee come in, and you're like, how is he not a top line left winger down the line, right? Like, what? Like, why would you not want him matched up against the best players on the other team, even if he isn't the most talented offensively, which I'd argue he might be on a lot of nights. But he's definitely going to give you the two-way effort, right? He's going to give you everything. He's going to give you everything. The same way Jonathan Toews will give you everything. He's not the most talented at everything he does, Toews, but he gives you everything. He's a very complete package, and that's how I see Farabee.
Yeah, for sure. I could see that. I mean, he showed it a little bit this year. I mean, I think with another year in the NHL, for sure. I mean, rookie seasons, I try not to expect too much. And when we talk about Nolan Patrick later, I'll have something to say about that because I think maybe I expected too much. But, I try not to expect too much from these kids, especially when you can visibly see that they're, I call it man bodies. Like, they're not full grown into their body yet, and they're playing against men. That's a big deal. Like, they're playing against solid dudes, like, who have grown into their body. Like, yes, you're a man, but you haven't grown into your body yet. Do you know what I mean? And
yes.
I don't think Farabee has grown into his body. So once he finally puts on, some muscle and whatnot, then it's going to be like, okay, now he's going to be ready to do some things. This year, he showed you what he could do offensively for sure, and even defensively. Vigneault loves him, and once you're on Vigneault's good side, that means you're playing pretty damn good. So I'm excited for next year, man. I'm excited. I didn't expect this year to happen the way it did, so my expectations were tempered. But next year, I feel like, everything's coming together for next year. Yes. And, like, I get goosebumps even thinking about next year, dude, because, let's say, this year doesn't go how we're all hoping if they start the 24-game format and the Flyers don't win. Next year is the year, dude. And if it's going to be the year, a guy like Farabee is going to have to take a jump somewhat. And I'm thinking, like, 35, 45 points, something like that. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, I won't be disappointed if he doesn't do that because I understand he's still only be 19, 20 years old. But he's got the skill. He's got the talent to do it, I think.
I think so too, man. He's got the personality for it too, the character to be a pro. And I remember hearing Hextall talk about him, and that's actually what piqued my interest in him the most, was just listening to Hextall talk. He was like gushing over Farabee, and he did the same thing about Travis Konechny. He is like so excited about Konechny. And I truly believe Hextall knows his prospects. I mean, people can say what they want about, GM and all that. But I mean, it's kind of debatable. I mean, it's very, evidence is in on that one. TK, who's having, and I'm going to say it, a Giroux-like progress to his career. I mean, at the rate that he's been progressing, it's possible he puts up 90 points soon. I mean, who knows? I mean, he just keeps getting better. And, it's just all these young players. And I watched him talk about Farabee, and he's the type of guy where I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised they convert him to a center, or if they try. You know what I mean? I don't think he should be, but just the game is there. Like, you're like, well, he kind of has it anyway. Like, he will be a good center. Like, if you make him a center, he can play center. The same way, like, Raffle can play center. Like Raffl's not a center. He's a left wing. But he can play center. You can put him at center. He'll play D. And people underestimate that element of Raffl, but Raffl's a very smart player. Very, very smart player. I would say he's maybe not the most talented, but he's a very smart player. And I think he has that intelligence where you can shift him to do anything. And Giroux's also that guy. You can put him anywhere. Couturier. You could throw Couturier as a defenseman, and I say this confidently, and he would be one of the best defensemen in the league. And I truly mean that. Learning how to skate backwards, all of that. Throw him in a position he would fail. I still believe he would succeed as a defenseman in the NHL. And that is not, I would not say that about 99% of players.
That's for sure. Ridiculous. For sure. Yeah, I think that says a lot about the player, the IQ and whatnot, the drive to want to be that good. I think if I was like, a Ron Hextall type guy, like, sure, a lot of these guys have skill. Let's say they all have skill. But what's going to separate guys is the drive, the passion, the work ethic. If somebody with skill wants to win more than the next guy with skill, I'm happy to get that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I totally agree with that statement. And I think those are the type of players that really win you championships a lot of times. Mm-hmm. Is that like I don't want to say they win you championships because everybody's part of the recipe. Like an Ovechkin is absolutely part of the recipe of a competitor, of a championship. It's just he's a rare element. Realistically, a guy like Ryan O'Reilly, right, who even bounced around, right? That's a Mike Richards type, right? I could even say Sean Couturier. Those type of guys, they are like a must-have to win a championship. And I think Farabee is kind of in that window of that type of guy who probably will come up big in moments, throughout games. Like TJ Oshie is that guy, you throw him on shootouts in front of the world over and over again, and not even fazed by it, does the same move every time. Just like little details like that. Those are the type of guys who break him up because you just saw him hit another level in the playoffs. And again, size, physicality, all that stuff matters. But there are those elements to a game that, like, some guys have it and you see that they have it and you're like, you need to play here. And I think even like a guy like Kevin Hayes has it. And I think we saw some of that, which is why a lot of people went, well, he put up 20 goals this year, and I don't care, he got $7 million a year, but he put up 20 goals last year and he got $7 million. But when people saw those moments, right, those moments of heroics, that's like what wins you championships, is those guys with, the super talent within there, which you really don't have much of. You only have a handful of those guys.
Right, I understand what you're saying completely. So it's like, okay, you're paying him $7 million, but he only scored 20 goals. But when he makes the plays like you mentioned to beat the Blue Jackets in overtime, or score those shorthanded goals, how big, how important were those goals? That's where the $7 million comes in. That makes a lot of sense. Completely makes a lot of sense there. Back to Farabee a little bit. Sort of to finish out the regular season this year, 8 goals, 13 assists, 21 points in 52 games. I think most nights, or at least for long stretches of the season, had limited ice time for a bit there. 7 of his 8 goals were even strength goals. So imagine, he gets a little bit of power play time. His minutes go up a little bit. He could easily pop 15 goals next year. Easily, I think. We could be looking at 30, 35 point season. And that could even be on the lower side. If his minutes increase and maybe he sneaks in some power play time, who knows, we're hearing what's it called might come back, the compliance buyouts, and I'm just speculating here, but who knows? Maybe a guy like JVR gets bought out or whatever. That opens up a power play spot for somebody. There is potential for Farabee to have a solid year. He'll turn 21 next February, so it could be a year for Joel Farabee, hopefully.
Yeah, it's about opportunity, though. You're not wrong. I mean, there's a lot of talent in this organization right now, and even if you want to play a guy like Farabee a lot, it's not like he doesn't have the competition. I mean, we just added Wade Allison and Tanner Lashinsky as well. And those two guys, they're going to compete for an NHL spot immediately. They might not get it. I'm not saying they're more ready. But, I mean, again, you were talking about age. I think they're both 22, going on 23 years old. I mean, they're becoming men. They played NCAA hockey. they're going to be fighting for those spots as well. So it's going to get interesting, man. It's going to be a weird year. And I think a lot of these guys that we really like Tyler Pitlick and maybe even a Derek Grant, who I really like, who I think they're considering re-signing. I mean, Flyers might be like, well, we might not have the space. And just sheer fact that we just have too much talent. And that's a weird thing to say. But actually be happy. I think, and I made a video about this, I think Phil Myers is kind of a representation of that. Like, Phil Myers in another team's prospect pool would be like the golden god of prospects. But to us, we have so many of them that he just seems like another really good prospect. But how many 6'5" right-handed defense? I was just talking about Colt Parayko. Like, he won a championship playing the way he did. Like, Phil Myers, in my opinion, is a very similar ceiling. And it's like, he's just another name for us, you know? He's great. He's amazing. But it's like, that is a weird representation of where the Flyers are today, where it's like, we actually have a lot of good players. And it's weird, so true. You know? Yeah.
No, it's so true, man. Because, I mean, even just, excuse me, even hearing you say, like, the Flyers have so many guys and they're running out of space, like, that makes me, like, weirdly happy. Like, I shouldn't be that happy. Like, when's the last time, you know, in your history of watching the Flyers, you could say, man, they're running out of space for all these guys? Like,
never.
Like, my favorite, and this is going to sound weird, like, my favorite, the Flyers are like a TV show for me right now. Like, their whole roster situation. I'm like, oh my God, like, how is this going to play out? Like, they have they have way too many guys. Like, what are they going to do? Because in my opinion, they're going to have to make a move on the big roster. And who's going to go? Who's going to stay? I mean, and maybe I'm getting a little bit off topic, but the names everybody throws out, it's JVR and Shane Gostisbehere. It's like, you know, one guy's making 7, one guy's making 4. Like, you're kind of bursting at the seams for guys to come up. You know, you mentioned Allison, Lazinski. Like, these guys are supposedly, you know, professional, pro hockey ready. You know, they could potentially make the Flyers. Are definitely going to be on the Phantoms. You mentioned Phil Myers. Like, the guy's a stud, flat out stud. And he started out the season on the third line this year. I think he ended up finishing on the second line. And then we have guys like Zamula and one of my personal favorites, Wyatt Wiley, who may never play for the Flyers just because they're so loaded. But I think that's a testament to that. Because they're so loaded, a guy like Wyatt Wiley may never make the Flyers. And Cam York, like their number 1 draft pick last year, we haven't really even mentioned. Like, he'll be up in a year or two. Like, they're bursting at the seams with talent.
We didn't even talk about Yinning. Nobody even mentions Adam Yinning, who's a second-round pick and probably going to be an NHL player as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like they're like my favorite soap opera right now. The Flyers and this whole roster situation. Like, what are they going to do? Like, I can't wait to see.
Well, it's interesting, and I think we want to get into the draft here, but it's interesting you say that because I'm kind of expecting the unexpected. I am not a guy who likes big things, but you talked about we have JVR's contract, and I don't know if the Flyers are shopping JVR. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just throwing out a scenario because that number gets thrown around, and I'm just trying to get creative. So I'm throwing out an idea, but JVR has a large cap hit. We have an abundance of talent. There are teams out there sometimes who have a very large cap hit of maybe a player that maybe they regret signing recently. Maybe that player makes $10 million a year. Like, is that an opportunity for the Flyers to go out and get an elite player by taking on a massive cap? Which I'm not saying I want to do, nor should we, but are the Flyers going to look to even get creative or maybe try to swap some big contracts out, which could be a move if they're trying to make moves? I personally believe, from what I've seen with Chuck Fletcher, it'll be slow and steady. It'll be stick with what I have, keep what I have. If I do make a move, it'll be because I'm because I'm bringing in more players. But we never know, right? Because what happens when York comes in? Like, at that point, Cam York or Shane Gostisbehere? I don't know the answer to that question. I like both of them quite a bit. The answer is Cam York, right? So what happens to Shane Gostisbehere? And if it's not Shane Gostisbehere, what happens to the player who has Ghost's spot? What happens to Haig? Is Niskanen still around? Is Braun still? That's what I mean. There's so many options that I'm like, I don't even know where to start to be honest with you, to some degree. The only thing I have is like this mental fantasy of like Ivan Provorov and Phil Myers is my top pairing, and then like Sanheim is my number 3, and I can rotate. And I would love another elite defender to play with Sanheim on the second pairing if Niskanen's not here. Like that's what I have in my mind. And then like York is bottom pairing. I don't know. I'm just making that up in my head. And when is that? Is that next year? Because you see what I'm saying? There's so many questions that pop up even when you think of the roster itself. That's why like you start speculating and you fall down this rabbit hole of well, I don't want to move this guy. I don't want to move that guy.
It's fun, isn't it? It's like really fascinating just putting in guys and taking guys out. Yeah, it's like you can come up with so many different combinations or so many different roster looks with all the things that they could do. We were talking on our show a couple weeks ago, what to do with Justin Braun, and I'm a big Braun guy, but
I like him as well.
The way it looks, he's just the Flyers aren't going to be able to afford him, and it's okay because, excuse me, they have the guys that can come up and eventually take his spot. So. I'm listening here and I'm thinking a little bit about what the roster could be like, and Niskanen's here for at least one more year. I'm not sure that they'll re-sign him for less money. Maybe they will. But I wonder if, and I'm just speculating, just because, it's a fun topic, fun conversation. I wonder if Ivan Provorov takes on that Niskanen type role in a year or two. You know what I mean? And then you start pairing, like you mentioned, Provorov, Myers, that's an elite top pairing. You have Sanheim.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, are you saying Provorov with somebody younger like York or Zamula?
Potentially, it could be. Could you imagine Provorov and Zamula playing together? Oh my God,
it would be pretty cool. I mean, and I'll be honest, I've seen a little bit of York, and I hear the way Fleur talks about him. I mean, from what I understand about Cam York, he's probably better than most of us anticipate because we're so upset about Cole Caulfield that we didn't bother to realize that he was an underage defenseman on Team USA. He's the youngest player on the team besides Jack Hughes. Like, this is like a defenseman who's like kind of dirty, and his comparison is Brian Leach, which is like no joke. And I'm like, if this guy is ready, does he play with Provorov? I don't know. Can he even play the rights? I don't know, man. There's so many questions. But Zamula is a big boy. He's a very big boy. And that's another thing is like you talk about all the size with Zamula, with Myers, with Sanheim. I mean, to me, sky's the limit. I can speculate all day with you.
Dude, it's gonna be fun, man. And when this just gets me revved up, it gets me excited for the future, dude. Like, because the Flyers are stacked, they're loaded. Yes. And when I talk to like a guy like Dan Silver and Alex Appleyard about Igor Zamula, it's like, think of a guy with the like Ovechkin like charisma playing defense. Like this guy knows he's good and he just loves to play hockey. And I want to see that. I want to see a guy who's confident go out and beat you and then celebrate doing it. Like I just want to see it. It's okay, So I can't wait, dude. This team's gonna win a cup, and I can't wait for it. I hope it's next year, or if not this summer.
I hear ya. Well, speaking of this summer, let's get into the draft here. Let's get into our, I guess, final two segments here. Kind of. We'll start with one. We'll roll into the final one. So the draft talk. I think you heard. We talked about this a little bit prior to the call. Is I don't love speculating at this time because I don't really think much of us know what is happening with the draft. Too many games have been lost. A lot of these reports are cool and great, but I think that a lot of them are going to be wrong this year. That's kind of my attitude. So I haven't been full gung-ho. But I did want to see, is there anybody you're interested in the Flyers maybe taking a look at? Is there anybody you particularly would want the Flyers to draft? Or if not a player, maybe a position or a need in particular?
Yeah, so let me just bring this up here. So I put out an article a couple weeks ago on 3 guys I think that could potentially be available when the Flyers pick. I think they're going to be picking in the 24-26 range. As of now, they could end up redoing the whole draft order if they do the playoffs first and whatnot. But a couple guys that I like if they end up being there at, in that 24-26 range. The first guy was a player by the name of Jan Misak, and Misak was a guy who played for Litvinov HC in the Extraliga, and in this league, from what I've heard and what I've seen, is they don't really give the younger guys, that much playing time. And Misak, is a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid at the time, so wasn't getting all that much playing time in the Czech leagues. Comes over to the OHL for the Hamilton Bulldogs and just lights it up in the 22 games there. 15 goals, 10 assists in 22 games. Point producer for Hamilton, obviously. So I had Brandon Holmes of Dauber Prospects on the show a couple weeks ago, and he described Misak as a guy that could go towards the end of the first round, but could also go top 15 overall. He's not a dynamic skater, but has good hockey sense and excellent puck skills. Strong in his skates and has great strength. And what Alex had to say, he's played fourth-line minutes for a not-great Europe team, took off in the OHL, where he excelled playing top-line minutes. So what that could mean is this could be a top-end player who should go top 10, 15 spots in the draft, but could also potentially slip because he only has a small sample size playing in North America. So he's a name that kind of intrigued me a little bit there. He's a center, which I would love for the Flyers to draft. And, I almost hesitate using the word dynamic because I almost feel like that's not fair. But I think that's what's missing from the pipeline. Like if we look at the prospect pool a little bit for the Flyers, like they have everything. They have a lot of depth forwards, a lot of two-way forwards that can play. Morgan Frost obviously is the exception because he's not, we see him as a dynamic or an exciting offensive talent, right? Defensively, they're loaded up. They have a lot of high-end talent on the defensive end. They have 100 million goalies, coming up through the pipeline. But to me, what's missing is that marquee player that you just can't wait to make the Flyers. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping that they go after a guy like that. Jan Misak could be that guy. A couple other guys I have on my list here. A guy like Zion Nybeck. Another guy that actually, Alex really liked this guy a lot more than I did. He's a little bit smaller, so that kind of turns me off a little bit. I know that's kind of like ignorant to say because there have been some great players who are a little smaller. Nybeck's 5'8", but he's got decent size for his frame. He's 176 pounds. Player with very high upside. He'd be an exceptional pick at 24, 25, 26 if he's there. He's maybe flown under the radar a bit. There's a lot of decent Swedes in this draft, and Lucas Raymond, Alexander Holtz, and Noel Gunler going higher than Nybeck. But from everything I've heard the guys talk about, and from what I've gotten to see, he's got everything. Great work ethic, plays hard, grinds the wall, good and close, nice shot, shifty player. He can play on the penalty kill, very good penalty killer. Works very hard defensively, and he sets up his teammates. I mean, that kind of it sounds like a typical Alain Vigneault type player when you describe him like that, and I'm like, I guess he could fit right in over here. Right? Like, the first guy that came to my mind when I was talking to Alex was, he sounds exactly like Aube Kubel a little bit, right? Like, he's like a little bowling ball. You could put him in any situation. He'll excel offensively, but he's a team guy as well. So I thought that was really interesting.
Nice.
And there was one more guy here. Maverick Bourque. Have you heard anything about Maverick Bourque? He's got a cool name, but apparently he's good at hockey too.
His numbers are great, right? 71 points in 49 games. He's 18 years old. He's playing in the Q, so the inflated numbers are kind of expected, but also that's still really good. 5'10", 165, so slightly undersized, but not too bad. Yeah. I would say it sounds definitely interesting. The numbers alone, and then last year he produced at slightly under a point per game pace. Went up from -28 to a -4, so potential improvement in defensive play as well. So I don't know. I look at something like that. That's what, and I think that's the type of player you do draft.
Yeah.
In the first round, is you hope that you caught that guy on the upswing, like a Travis Sanheim, right? Where we took him at 17 and nobody knew who he even was. Yeah. And they were like, who? Why would you take him? He's a second. Same thing with Morgan Frost. Like, these guys were supposed to be second, third round picks. and it's because you caught them kind of on the upswing, or the downswing. I mean, they happens by mistake too with like somebody that connected, which I still have no idea about the 24. I remember he had skating problems. I still have never seen that. But little things like this. That's kind of what you hope for. That's what I see prime for this year is guys like that who, like you said, maybe came into the league, went into a new league, and lost their playoffs. Right, their ability to compete in the playoffs, ability to compete in juniors, ability to play at that home stretch, and maybe you raise their ranking and they sit in the second round or the end of the first round and don't make it up. Because even somebody like Nico Hischier, and I know we're going to get to this next, he solidified that spot number 1 at the end of the season. It wasn't like he had it there. And what would have happened without 2 or 3 months at the end of that season? What would happen in the rankings in a draft like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, and I think that's kind of what we're looking at this year. It's going to be a little weird. Maybe not, but that's kind of how I anticipate it.
Yeah, there could be a lot of moving parts, and you're kind of seeing that already. Guys are coming out with, it's the time of year for mock drafts and whatever because the draft is usually a couple weeks away. But, we don't know when the draft is going to be this year, and it's interesting to see how guys are kind of moving up and down with the last, 10 or so picks in the first round. Picks 20 to 31, and even some of the top picks in the second round, you're seeing all being interchanged. And it's just really interesting, It's going to be interesting to see if people fall. If people fall to the Flyers at 24, 25, 26, there's going to be a lot of high floor guys there. It's just, do you pick the ones with the higher ceiling or do you pick the safe guy?
Yeah. I always go higher ceiling.
You have to, man. You have to.
Especially early.
Yeah, you can't pass on somebody,
So let's wrap this up. Actually, I think this is a good time to do a nice little retrospective here, since you never really know until you look back into history. And we talked about this a little bit before. I'm going to talk about the 2017 draft. I believe you have an article. Why don't you share that article about us? We'll go through it and what you want to say, and we'll see if we can talk about it here at the end.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just, kind of recapping the top 5 picks of 2017. As everybody knows, Nolan Patrick missed I guess at this point he missed the entire season, his third year in the league. I guess I'll speak for myself when I say he's kind of underwhelmed his first 2 years. So we just, kind of looking back now, it's kind of what we do, 2020 vision and whatnot. It's easy to do, but I look back at the 2017 top 5 picks, and you got a guy like Hischier. He's not exactly, blowing the doors off statistically, but he is playing. He's having an okay career so far. He's only 21. He's still probably going to develop into a nice player. The Flyers obviously went with Nolan Patrick, second overall, and of the top 5 picks, he's probably, I don't want to say worst because I don't believe that's the right word. Not the worst pick, but definitely 5th out of the 5 players taken. When you consider right behind him, Miro Heiskanen went. Could you imagine a Heiskanen and Provorov top pairing? Cale Makar is, he's probably who's it between for the Calder? It's between Cale Makar and what's the other Hughes from Vancouver?
Quinn Hughes. Yep.
And Elias Pettersson, who actually didn't he win Rookie of the Year last year? Was it? Who am I thinking of that won it last year?
Wasn't it Pettersson?
I thought it was.
Who else would beat him?
Yeah, right. So when you look at those players and you're like,
I'm gonna look it up.
You're like, damn.
I already forget.
I thought it was between
him. Yeah. Who else would beat him that year? I mean, that was a ridiculous rookie year. It was a ridiculous rookie year.
Yeah. So of those 5 guys, it's like, damn, could you imagine having any one of those guys besides Nolan Patrick right now? Cale Makar is breaking out, could win Calder Cup this year, and Miro Heiskanen's as steady as they come. He's a horse back there. Hischier's okay. He's going to be solid, and Pettersson already won a Calder, and the Flyers kind of have Nolan Patrick kind of figuring out if he's skating. That's what we hear all the time, and for most of the season I was a little bit tough on Patrick. Why isn't he playing? Why isn't he playing? Trying to find reasons why and maybe speculating a little bit, but I was able to I had the opportunity to talk to Phantoms forward Curtis Gabriel with Dan on the Brotherly Pod show. And, Curtis said something in the show. We didn't ask anything about the whole – you remember when he hit Patrick and Patrick went out injured or something?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't ask him about that, but he made a point to bring it up. And he mentioned that he saw Patrick after the game and asked him if it was anything with his head. And Patrick made a comment that he took a puck to the ear, and that's what was bothering him. And from that point on, I found it really hard to, kind of, I don't know how to say it, but talk negatively about Nolan Patrick, because I believe now that there could genuinely be something going on, and I'm hoping that they can figure it out and he's going to be back with the team next year, because I 100% believe that Nolan Patrick playing for Alain Vigneault is the perfect match. I firmly believe that he can be at least a 50-55 point player under Alain Vigneault. He'll most likely be playing on the third line. You mentioned, Farabee, Patrick, God willing, Oscar Lindblom as a line. Could you imagine that? That would be a sick line, dude. So I hope Nolan Patrick gets everything figured out. The article, I'm going to try to put some kind of positive spin on it, but right now, if we're looking back, it doesn't look like the greatest second overall pick, for Ron Hextall, considering who went. I mean, even for the Devils, could you imagine? They would have took a lot of crap for taking Kel McCarr or Miro Heiskanen over Nico Hischier, because at the time, all we heard was a two-horse race, right?
Well, McCarr at the time also was a high school player.
That's it.
And if I remember correctly, people really didn't want to give him even – I remember there was going to be huge doubts he was even going to be taken. First of all, there were huge doubts about this draft overall, which I don't think were very fair. Miro Heiskanen was not not until the very end, where people were like, oh, this guy actually might be really awesome. But I remember the whole draft was kind of like, yeah, this is not that good of a draft. And then turns out, oh, yeah, just Elias Pettersson is maybe a legend at 18 years old. And don't get me wrong, I saw Pettersson a little bit, and I was like, oh, really elite. But it's hard to tell, man. And you say that thing about New Jersey. They took Zacha over Provorov.
Yeah.
Until today, I still have no idea where they were thinking, because my backup there was Barzal. In my head, I was like, my next one, it's Provorov and then Barzal. And that's how I saw it in my head. And they went Zacha first, right? And that hurts for them. But there's still a long window. I am still kind of in the minority where I actually believe if Nolan Patrick is healthy, I think his ceiling is higher above 5 points. I think all five of them are elite players. I don't look at the five of them and be like, oh, one of them are worse than the other. And obviously, Pettersson maybe is the best. But I actually look at more like somebody like Elias Anderson as actually being the bust of that top, because he actually has a bad attitude from what I can tell.
True, yeah.
Where Nolan Patrick, and this is the way I see it, I could be wrong, is I see him as similar to what kind of Sean Couturier went through, where not only that, he came in with an injury, and I think maybe that was Hextall's mistake, was keeping him in the NHL, but I understand why they did. But I don't think he was necessarily NHL ready, and then came in, not like a second-round pick should be. He was transitioning. I think his whole development process has been a mess. So I would love to see, I agree with what you said 100%. The AV situation is perfect for him. If he ends up being a 55-point player, I think fine, good. At least he's not a bust, right? He's a good player. He's still going to be a top player on your team. He can be big for a playoff run. But I do believe with you that with AV, with the way this team is playing, I still think that high performance is possible. I think he's young enough. I think he has all the skill set, and I think the fact that he made the NHL being injured, I don't think that would have happened for any other prospect. And I would include his competition with Pettersson, Hischier, and maybe they made an exception for him, but I don't how many players have made the NHL out of camp at that age with undergoing surgery? I've just never seen it happen. So I'm like, there has to be a reason behind that. Though I do agree with you, he has been underwhelming. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, last year, that whole, and I say last year, not including this season, right. That whole season was extremely underwhelming. And I think that put doubt in about everything. Because that was the year that Nolan Patrick was supposed to be a breakout year, and instead the entire team went under.
Yeah.
But at that point, I'm like, okay, is that Nolan Patrick or is that the team? I don't know. But time will tell, right? Like, it could not matter in the end, because let's say this head injury is really severe, and let's say it is career-ending, and I don't think that's the case, but let's just say. I mean, we'll never find out, and then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it could have, should have, would have been, and it's just the reality of the situation. But I do think it's a very interesting question, and I think in retrospect, that top 5 is pretty awesome, because, like, let's say Patrick is the worst. Of the other 4 that were taken, I remember there were huge doubts about all of them. Even Makar. I remember real huge doubts about Makar. And then, all he did was have 50 points in 57 games as a rookie.
Yeah.
No big deal. It's an interesting question. I definitely think people should check out your article. I think it's something to revisit, and it would be cool if you did something again down the line. If maybe Patrick does come back,
100%.
You do a part 2. And see what ended up happening. Because, in my opinion, I don't see any 5 of those guys going anywhere anytime soon. And I think it probably won't end up being the best of them, even though he's taking number 1. But I think Pettersson obviously ended up being like that slight under the radar. It's hard to say guy number 5 under the radar. But I do remember one thing very specific about that draft. Trevor Linden was asked who they would take first overall if they got the first overall pick that year, and they were very clear that they would not take Hischier or Patrick. So it was very clear that Pettersson probably was their guy the entire time, and that regardless of that, they were taking him.
That would have been really interesting to see.
I don't know. If he was taken first overall, if they got it and he was taken anyway, that would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Then if the Flyers would have taken Nolan Patrick at 5 or whatever, nobody would hate him. Like, nobody would be angry, It'd be like, whatever,
Yeah, that's true, man. Yeah. And so, after hearing that whole thing with Gabriel, I'm kind of like, maybe I should cut him some slack a little bit, because he was, 18, 19, still put up 30 points in the NHL. I mean, that's kind of impressive when you think about it. Like, this is still a kid putting up 30 points, before he's 21 years old. So I'll cut him some slack, give him the year off. Maybe, he took care of whatever he's had to take care of, comes back rejuvenated in his 4th year, 21 years old, and, let's go now.
Yeah, but he's got to do it. You're not wrong, right? Like,
he's got to do it.
You get the benefit of the doubt. They always will. At the end of the day, they got plenty of players who were taken high up, who had excuses to use, and they used them, or they were used for them, and it didn't matter in the end, right? It didn't matter. And even somebody great like Eric Lindros, arguably the best Flyer of all time, at least talent-wise, he won't go down as the best Flyer of all time, and he probably should have been, but he won't. It will not happen for him, because longevity also plays a big part in the game. No doubt about that.
It's very true. Yep.
Jim, thank you so much, man. We did a long one today. I appreciate you jumping on. Before we say bye, just let people know where to follow you one last time. Just give yourself a last shout out. And thank you again for joining us. And
my pleasure, man.
Appreciate it.
Yariv, it's my pleasure, man. So I just started contributing for Puck Pros. You can find some of my writing over there. You can hear me on High and Wide Radio. We do a couple shows a week. I do a show with Jack and Kyle. I do a show with Kelly Hinkle from Broad Street Hockey, actually, and then I'm doing a prospect show with guys like Dan and Alex and Manny from Brotherly Pod and Brandon Holmes. So make sure you guys listen to those. Angry and Negative Show, obviously. You can find me. You can find me all over the place.
That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and that's great. I love that you're doing so much, and definitely check out his stuff, and we'll have you back on. This was great. I truly appreciate it.
Let's do it again, man. I had a great time. You have to come on my show sometime, Dean.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do it, man.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll be back. We'll be back next weekend with Jamie. Back to normal. And again, we'll keep these rolling. Thank you again for listening. Thank you, our fans. We love you. And goodbye.